Hey, stop scrolling for a second. Because what I'm about to tell you happened in a house full of marble floors and gold mirrors. And yet, the most powerful person in that room was the one everyone thought had no power at all. A woman fell to her knees in the middle of a grand foyer, gasping, choking, and the people around her, they laughed. But nobody in that room knew who she really was. And nobody knew what was about to happen next. Welcome back, friends. If you're new here, grab a seat because today's story is one of the most emotional, most unforgettable ones we've ever shared. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Which country do you call home? Drop it in the comments. I love knowing who's here with me tonight. This is a story about dignity, about the lies people tell themselves when they have money, and about one woman who was underestimated by everyone, until the truth came out in the last place anyone expected. Stay with me. This one gets unbelievable. Nobody expected an ordinary Tuesday to end this way. Renee Coleman had worked in the Whitmore mansion for 6 years. She was 51 years old, with tired knees, calloused hands, and a heart that had survived more than most people could imagine. She was the housekeeper, though housekeeper barely captured everything she did. She cooked, she cleaned, she remembered every guest's allergies. She remembered which grandchild liked the crusts cut off their sandwiches. She was invisible in the way the help is often invisible to the wealthy. Present every day, seen by no one. The Whitmore family lived in a $15 million estate outside of Charleston, South Carolina. Marble floors that echoed. Crystal chandeliers that threw rainbows across the walls at noon. A staircase so wide you could host a wedding on it, and they had twice. Old Mr. Whitmore had passed 2 years earlier, leaving the estate to his only son, Julian. Julian was 34, sharp-suited, always on his phone, always somewhere between a deal and a dinner reservation. He wasn't cruel. He was just absent. The kind of rich that makes a man forget what the ground under his feet actually feels like. His fiancée was a different story. Vanessa Hale had married into money once before. A divorce had left her with a settlement and a taste for a lifestyle she intended to keep forever. She was beautiful in the practiced way of someone who had spent a lifetime being looked at. And she had never, not once, looked Renee in the eye. That Tuesday evening the house was full. Vanessa's sisters had come for a pre-wedding dinner, an engagement celebration 2 weeks before the big day. Laughter drifted through the halls. Wine glasses clinked. Renee had spent 6 hours preparing dinner. Shrimp and grits with a Charleston twist, cornbread from her grandmother's recipe, a peach cobbler still warm from the oven. She carried the final plate out herself, careful, steady, proud of it in the quiet way people are proud of work no one will thank them for. And that's when it happened. Her foot caught the edge of the Persian rug. The plate tilted. Rice and chicken scattered across the marble. And in the same breath, Renee's throat seized. She'd been fighting a lingering cough for days, blaming it on the change of weather, ignoring it the way people who can't afford to be sick always do. She dropped to her knees. Her hand flew to her chest. She couldn't breathe. From the sofa, Vanessa's sisters started to laugh. "Oh my God, did she really just drop the whole plate?" one of them said, phone already lifting to film it. Vanessa didn't move to help. She sat there in her red dress, swirling her wine, a small smile curling at the corner of her mouth. "That's what happens when you hire the help from a temp agency," she said lightly, like she was commenting on traffic. Renee's vision blurred at the edges. The room tilted. Somewhere far away, she heard laughter, and closer, she heard her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. And then the front door burst open. Julian Whitmore stood there, phone still pressed to his ear, mid-sentence about a stock transfer, and froze. His eyes locked onto the woman gasping on his marble floor. And something in his face changed completely. Time didn't slow down the way it does in movies. Sped up. Julian dropped his phone. It hit the marble and cracked, but he didn't even glance at it. He crossed the foyer in 4 strides and dropped to his knees beside Renee. his $3,000 suit pressing into the mess of rice and sauce without a second thought. "Renee. Renee, look at me." His voice cracked with something the room had never heard from him before. Real fear. She couldn't speak. Her lips had started to take on a bluish tint. Her eyes were wide, panicked, searching. "Someone call 911. Julian shouted. Nobody moved. Vanessa's sisters exchanged glances, phones still half raised. Vanessa herself sat frozen, her wine glass suspended in the air, confusion flickering across her face. Confusion, not concern. "Julian, it's probably nothing, she's just. Call 911. He roared it this time, and the whole room flinched. He turned back to Renee, and something in his training, 3 summers as a lifeguard in college a lifetime ago, a version of himself he barely remembered, kicked in through the panic. He got behind her, wrapped his arms around her middle, positioned his fist just above her navel. "I've got you," he said, quiet now, steady. "I've got you, Renee. Stay with me." He thrust upward. Once. Nothing. Nothing. On the third, something dislodged. A piece of shrimp shell, small enough to have seemed harmless, lethal enough to have nearly taken her life at 51 years old on a stranger's marble floor while people who called themselves family laughed. Renee gasped, a huge, ragged, beautiful sound, and pulled in a breath so deep it seemed to fill the whole room. Julian held her as she cried and coughed and shook, and he didn't let go. Not when the paramedics arrived 12 minutes later. Not when Vanessa stood up, smoothing her dress, saying, "Well, that was dramatic," to her sisters like she was reviewing a show she hadn't enjoyed. Julian looked up at his fiancée for the first time all evening. And what he saw in her face in that moment, the boredom, the irritation that her party had been interrupted, told him something he had spent 8 months refusing to see. "Get out," he said quietly. "Excuse me. I said get out, Vanessa. You and your sisters. Now." The room went silent except for the fading sound of the ambulance siren getting closer. What happened over the next hour would be the thing people in that town talked about for years. Julian rode with Renee in the ambulance. He held her hand the entire way, and when the paramedic asked if he was family, Renee, voice raw, barely a whisper, answered before he could. "He's the closest thing to it," she said. At the hospital, while Renee was being checked over, Julian sat in the waiting room and made a phone call. Not to Vanessa. To his lawyer. Because here is the part of the story nobody in that mansion knew. The part that would come out over the following days like dominoes falling one after another. 6 years ago, when Renee Coleman first walked into the Whitmore estate looking for work, she wasn't just a woman down on her luck. She was a former high school teacher who had spent 11 years shaping young minds in inner-city Charleston, until budget cuts eliminated her position and a family health crisis drained every dollar she'd saved. She took the housekeeping job because pride doesn't pay medical bills. She never told anyone at the mansion about her past. She never asked for pity. She simply worked, folding towels with the same precision she once used to grade essays, remembering every family member's birthday the way she once remembered every student's name. Old Mr. Whitmore had known. In his final year, sick and mostly confined to his study, he and Renee had spent countless afternoons talking. Really talking, the kind of conversation rich men rarely have with the people who clean their homes. He'd told her once near the end, "You remind me of my late wife. She had the same fire in her, hidden behind good manners." What Julian was calling his lawyer about that night was a document his father had left, a codicil to the will, sealed, to be opened only under specific conditions his father had defined but never fully explained to his son. Conditions that, as it turned out, had just been met. The old man had left Renee Coleman a piece of the estate. Not a token. Not a thank you gift. A genuine stake. Enough to change her entire life, tied to a single quietly written condition. That she be treated, at all times, with a dignity his own family had too often failed to show the people who served them. Julian hadn't known any of it until that phone call. His father's attorney read him the terms in a voice that made the hair on his arms stand up. "Your father wrote," the lawyer said, "that the true measure of this family would be revealed not in how they treated their equals, but in how they treated the woman who folded their laundry. He asked that this be reviewed if she was ever harmed and the family failed to protect her." Julian sat in that hospital waiting room and put his head in his hands. He thought of every dinner Renee had made without thanks. Every holiday she'd spent decorating a house that wasn't hers so a family that barely saw her could feel the warmth of a Christmas. He thought of Vanessa's laughter echoing off the marble, and felt something in his chest go cold and then, slowly, resolute. The story could have ended there. A woman nearly died, was saved, and a man realized who truly mattered in his life. That would have been a good story. But it wasn't the whole story. 3 days later, Renee was released from the hospital, weak but recovering. She returned, not to the mansion out of habit or expectation, but because Julian personally drove to her small apartment and asked her to. "I'm not asking you to come back as staff," he told her, standing awkwardly in her doorway, hands in his pockets like a boy asking a girl to prom. "I'm asking you to come back so I can explain something. And so I can apologize. Properly. In person." Renee, still weak, still wrapped in a blanket on her second-hand sofa, studied him for a long moment. "You already saved my life once this week, Julian. What else is there?" He told her everything. The will. Codicil. His father's words about dignity being the true measure of a family. Renee was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled, not with excitement but with something deeper. "Your father used to tell me I reminded him of a teacher he had as a boy. Someone who believed in him when no one else did. I didn't know he was." She stopped, pressed a hand to her mouth. "I didn't know he thought that much of me." "He did," Julian said. "And I think somewhere along the way I stopped seeing what he saw. I got comfortable. I let people treat you like you were invisible in my own house. And I never said a word. That's on me. Not just Vanessa. Me." It was in this moment, raw, honest, unguarded, that the true twist of the story revealed itself. Not the inheritance. Not the fainting spell. But this. Julian Whitmore, a man who had spent his adult life measuring worth in dollar signs and deal closings, finally understood that the truest wealth in that mansion had never been in the chandeliers or the marble. It had been walking through his front door every morning at 7 a.m., wearing an apron, asking for nothing. He called off the engagement to Vanessa that week. Quietly, without drama, without needing the town to know the details. Some things, he decided, didn't need an audience. Word travels fast in a small southern town, even when people try to keep things private. Vanessa didn't take the broken engagement well. She told anyone who'd listen that Julian had lost his mind over the help. She painted herself as the wronged party at every luncheon and hair appointment she could find an ear at. For a while, some people believed her, because it's always easier to believe the version of the story where the rich, beautiful woman is the victim. But Renee never said a bad word about Vanessa. Not once. When people asked her about that night, she'd simply say, "Everybody has bad days. I choose to remember the people who showed up for me, not the ones who didn't." That grace, real, unforced, hard-won grace, was in its own way more powerful than anything Vanessa could have said in her own defense. People noticed. People always notice who chooses kindness when they have every right to choose bitterness. Renee used part of what old Mr. Whitmore left her exactly the way you might expect from a woman who used to be a teacher. She didn't buy a bigger house first. She didn't buy a car first. She started a small after-school tutoring program in the same neighborhood where she used to teach. Free, for any kid whose family couldn't afford extra help. She named it after her grandmother, the same grandmother whose peach cobbler recipe had been sitting on Vanessa's marble floor the night everything changed. Julian funded the program's building without being asked. He didn't put his name on it. He didn't want credit. He'd learned, finally, that the best kind of giving doesn't need applause. Renee still visited the mansion sometimes, not as staff but as a guest at Julian's insistence. It felt strange at first, sitting on the same couch where she used to dust the cushions, being served coffee by a young woman who now held the job Renee once had. "Does it feel odd?" Julian asked her one evening, watching her hesitate before sitting. "A little," she admitted. "I keep wanting to get up and help." "You've helped enough," he said. "Let someone take care of you for once." There was a new kindness in that house now, one that hadn't existed when old Mr. Whitmore was alive and grieving quietly, or when Julian was absent and distracted, or when Vanessa ruled the social calendar with a sharp tongue and sharper judgment of who deserved kindness and who didn't. The new housekeeper, a young single mother named Priya, later said it was the strangest, kindest job she'd ever had, because her employer actually asked about her daughter's school project, actually remembered her coffee order, actually treated her like a person instead of a fixture. "Someone taught him that," Priya said once. "I don't know who, but someone taught that man how to see people." A year passed. Renee's tutoring program had grown from 12 kids to over 90. Local news did a story on it. A woman who once nearly died on a stranger's floor, laughed at by people who thought her unworthy of basic human dignity, was now being interviewed on television about literacy rates and childhood opportunity. Poised, articulate, radiant in a way that had nothing to do with the modest blazer she wore for the segment and everything to do with the peace in her eyes. Julian watched that interview from his office, alone, a small smile on his face that had nothing performative about it. He'd changed too, in quieter ways nobody put on television. He started actually eating dinner with his staff sometimes instead of retreating to his study. He remembered names. He learned, slowly, painfully, the difference between having people around him and actually seeing them. He never remarried. Not because heartbreak had made him bitter. The opposite, really. He said once to a close friend, "I think I was engaged to the version of a life I thought I was supposed to want. I'm still figuring out what I actually want. I'm in no hurry now." It would be easy to end the story here, with growth, redemption, a program helping 90 kids. That would be a good ending. But there is one more scene that people who know this story always remember most. It happened at the tutoring center's one-year anniversary celebration. Balloons in the gymnasium of the community center. Parents and kids and volunteers. Renee, standing at a small podium, about to give a short speech. She'd asked Julian to come, and he had, standing quietly near the back, the same way he used to stand quietly in the corner of his own mansion during parties, except now, for the first time in his life, he wasn't there to be seen. He was there because he wanted to be. Renee looked out at the room, at the kids who now had a safe place to go after school, at the parents whose faces held a hope that hadn't been there a year earlier, and she said something that would end up printed on the wall of that center in gold lettering. "I used to think the worst moment of my life happened on someone else's kitchen floor. I was wrong. It happened years before that. Every single day I believed my worth was measured by the job title on my paycheck. It took nearly losing my breath to remember I never lost my worth. Not for one single second." The room erupted into applause. Somewhere in the back, a grown man in a $2,000 coat wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and didn't care who saw. If you're wondering what happened to Vanessa, life has its own way of settling accounts, quietly and without anyone needing to seek revenge. She moved to a different city eventually, chasing another version of the life she believed she was owed. People who knew her say she still tells the story of the maid who ruined her engagement at parties, unaware, or perhaps unwilling to admit, that the story reveals far more about her than it ever did about Renee. Kindness, it turns out, doesn't need to be avenged. It simply needs to be lived out loud, consistently, by someone willing to choose it even when it costs them nothing to choose cruelty instead. Renee never needed Vanessa to be punished. Her own life, built quietly and with dignity, was answer enough. So here's what this story really comes down to, friends. It's easy to measure people by the size of their house, the label on their dress, the seat they occupy at the table. But real worth was never in any of that. It was in a woman who spent 6 years being unseen, and never once let that erase who she was inside. It was in a man who finally opened his eyes and chose to become someone his father would be proud of, not because of an inheritance clause, but because it was the right thing to do. The moral is simple, but it's one we all need reminding of sometimes. Never let the way someone treats you define your worth. And never let your own comfort blind you to the dignity owed to every single person who crosses your path, especially the ones the world tends to overlook. Renee Coleman walked into that mansion as a woman nobody noticed. She walked out of that story as someone none of us will ever forget. If this story touched your heart even a little tonight, I'd be so grateful if you hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need a story like this one. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We share stories just like this every single week. Stories about real dignity, real love, and real second chances. And if you know someone who needs a little hope today, someone who's been made to feel invisible, please share this with them. Thank you for staying with me tonight and for letting this story into your heart. I'll see you in the next one.